Welcome to Kent Hance, the best storyteller in Texas podcast. You can find us online at hancepodcast.com. And we also encourage you to go to our past episodes, go through the whole library. There's a lot of great content there. And I would particularly, it's a tough word, encourage you to listen to the interview with Senator Ted Cruz. It's really good, and it's a side of Senator Cruz you may not know.
We didn't talk about politics. We talked about him as an individual, how he got the clerk for the Supreme Court, just a lot of stories about how his parents got here, his dad got here, and how his parents met and got married, and a little about college. I like to, when I interview people, just like I did on Dan Patrick, talk about them and how they got where they are now. Everyone knows their positions on tax issues and, tariffs and all the political things, but they most of the time they don't know the other, aspects of their growing up and what was important to them. So it's kind of a fun interview, and you'll know him a lot better after you listen.
I'll tell you what, on Wednesday of this week, I'll publish the Dan Patrick interview. It's really entertaining. He's very good. It is.
He talks about getting the Temptations at their senior dance and how he got it, and he just lucked into it. And it is pretty funny, some of the things that he had happen. And, he did the eulogy at Bum Phillips' funeral and had a different life before he ever got in politics. And it's very interesting.
Well, Chancellor, why don't we get started today with your saying of the day?
Buzz Aldrin said, failure is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you're alive and well and trying.
I like that.
Buzz Aldrin. One thing I was looking at today, October the 28th, 1962, I was a freshman at Texas Tech, and the Cuban Missile Crisis was solved. The Russians agreed to withdraw the missiles that they'd put in Cuba, and it was a big event for me and everyone else that was in that 18 to 22 range. And we'd been working weeks of thinking that we were fixing to get drafted and there was going to be a war, and it was a very serious time, and that people don't realize that that there were times in our lifetime that you were concerned whether you're going to be drafted and go to war or not. And that was, it's been 62 years ago, and that it was a relief when they removed those missiles from Cuba.
Can you give us a little bit of backstory on how that happened and how it was realized?
What happened, the Russians had taken over Cuba through Fidel Castro, their ally. They put the Russian missiles in Cuba, and Kennedy called their hand on it. And the result was that there was about a month or two that we were all concerned whether we were going to war or not, would be drafted. And I think most of the people at my age at that time figured if it happened that we were going, and that you weren't thinking about going to Canada or, doing something like that. Now, later in the Vietnam War, when it appeared that we didn't have a win policy, we didn't have a policy at all, there were a lot of people that were trying to get in the reserves or figure out how to get out of being drafted and sent to Vietnam.
And what was the general consensus? I wasn't alive back then. What did the public feel about those people that were going to Canada?
Well, that was during the Vietnam War, and they were not highly thought of.
Mm-hmm.
And I interviewed a person for a job at Texas Tech, and I asked her, I was just talking about in general, I asked her how she met her husband, and she said he was living in Canada with her brothers, trying to avoid going to war. And I said, I don't know that you'd really fit in Lubbock. It's kind of a different situation. And just wanted to be honest with her.
Mm-hmm.
And but it was a big deal, and all of us were excited when the Russians announced that they were withdrawing the missiles from Cuba, because they're right there on your door. And no one was, Everyone I talked to, they just thought, we're going. You know, if we go, we go. Mm-hmm. We weren't talking about how do you get out of this. 5-10 years later on the Vietnam War, the rhetoric had changed to how do we avoid.
I'm curious, you've often spoke of your mother, and your mother sounded like she's pretty protective of you. I remember the story of when she prayed Larry away from you at Texas Tech. How'd your mom feel about the possibility of her baby boy going to war?
Well, she was concerned, but she knew, you know, they'd lived through World War II, and my dad and people like that had gone, and I think they didn't think the thought of avoiding it or going to Canada and avoiding the draft was just not thought of by the American public in 1962. And in 1968, it had changed. But in 1962, most of the people I knew, they thought, if you get called up, you got to go.
Right.
Period.
Right.
You know, there's no debate on it because they had lived through World War II. They'd gotten a softer cushion because of the Korean conflict. And we didn't win that, didn't lose. It got a stalemate. And as the Vietnam War unfolded, people started having some doubts because we'd fight for 2 weeks to take a hill, and then we'd give it up. Then we'd have to go back a month later and fight again. And there wasn't a strategy of how do we win this, get it over, and get it done.
Right.
I've always said, had USA been able to subcontract the Vietnam War to the Israelis, hell, it had been over in 2 weeks. They would have stopped it. You know, I mean, they have a no-nonsense policy, and their war's still going on with Hamas and Hezbollah. I don't understand what the Hamas leadership was thinking they would accomplish by doing this, where they could do it and kill some people, but did they not realize that Israel was going to come back and just bomb them into oblivion? I mean, their leadership did not look down the road about what might happen.
I'm curious your thoughts on this. You know, Israel, their largest campaign into Iran happened last week. Do you feel like Netanyahu and his people are like, you know what? The rest of the world's not going to take care of this. We're going to take care of this once and for all.
Well, the big problem with Iran came back when Biden took off the sanctions and let them have their money. They got billions of dollars, and they give that money to terrorists. And the result was you had wars and you've had terror attacks throughout the world. And so once they got that money back, and have their refineries totally operating, it's a different deal. The Israelis, I thought, took a measured approach when they bombed them last week. They were going after military bases. They were going after refinery, you know, certain things that were business or national security defense related. And they were not going after the public. They didn't want the public to turn on them. If they had completely fair elections in Iran, I think you'd have a moderate type of government that would work with other governments and not be ostracized by the rest of the world.
When you say that Iran got their money back, was that in the lifting of sanctions was allowing them to sell oil to the
Well, the Iranians got their money back. There were certain funds that had been frozen, and they had billions in different accounts throughout the world, and those were let go. Plus, they were able to sell oil, and and that was big money for them.
And then they in turn took that money and funded terror organizations.
Funded terrorists and Hezbollah and Hamas, and I don't think anyone questions that has not happened.
Would that have happened if President Trump been reelected?
I don't think so. I think, Trump, the foreign leaders are afraid of him, which I like. I like for them to be, I think they're thinking that crazy son of a gun might put the big one on us. And so I want them to be afraid of my president. And that I think, you had peace, and then it all goes back when we pulled out of Afghanistan, and the way we pulled out so fast and left over 1,400 Americans, just left them.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them still there. But once you make a move like that, it shows a sign of weakness in the international community. And I had one of the ambassadors that had worked under Trump, and he told me when the Afghanistan thing, the pullout happened, he said, Russia's going to invade Ukraine quickly, and it's less than 2 months.
Yeah, if the United States is that unorganized in a pullout,
they're not going to stop us. They're not going to get involved.
Right. That was really a black eye on America. That sight of the airplane with people clinging to it is worse than what it looked like, as you mentioned earlier, in Vietnam.
Yep. And it was a scary time, and many of them who had been friendly to the United States realized if they stayed there, they were going to get killed.
Mm-hmm.
A couple other things that the Mayo Clinic had a study that if you can stand on one leg for 30 seconds, you're not old. And I'll be 82 November 14th, and I'm not old.
You tried it?
I tried it. And it's, that's kind of a common sense deal. That's not a scientific, they looked at it in a scientific measure, but at the same time, it's pretty reasonable that if you can stand on one leg for 30 seconds, you're really not old.
I think you're such a great example of fitness into your 80s and 70s because you're in incredible physical shape, and that's because you've exercised.
I walk. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, I've got a good friend that he will jog and run, but he won't do it but on a Sunday about every 2 weeks. He'll run, 15 miles or something. I said, golly, you're going to die. The key in good health is being consistent in walking, and you don't tear up your knees. Swimming's even better. But if you work out, and I always do, 30 minutes to an hour every day, and the way I do it, I put my AirPods in, I catch up on phone calls. I walk up and down the halls of my house, walk up and down the stairs, and just keep going, and you can talk to people and get caught up on your calls between 5 and 6 o'clock. And that's something I've always done, and you can do two things at the same time and accomplish a lot and feel better. And I'll miss probably 10 or 15 days a year, but not many. Mm-hmm. And then I don't smoke. I've never smoked, and that I've told this story before, but that goes back to Tommy Joe Harrison, the coach at Dimmitt. When I was in the 7th grade, he told us, if you play for me and you smoke, you won't play for me. And he said, and the other thing you've got to realize is the American Medical Association. He said this just like it's a fact. I mean, just something he just drummed up. He said, the American Medical Association said, if you start smoking in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th grade, by the time you're 40, 38% of you will lose the use of your penis. and he told us that, and nobody laughed. We thought, the American Medical Association did that study, and at that age, you just figured that you have that, and you didn't want to lose it. But I told that at funeral, and a bunch of guys came up and said that's what he told us too. And, young guys. So if you exercise daily and you don't smoke, you really increase the chances of living a long time. And of course, one thing that can go against it is if hereditary, if you may have something in your line that is very difficult to overcome.
But you've always said, listen to your body.
Your body talks to you. Mm-hmm. If your arm's broken, it's going to tell you. Mm-hmm. It's going to be hurting. I read a report one time that the only disease, I thought this is pretty funny, the only disease that doesn't tell you that something's wrong is alcoholism. And and it'll tell you, hey, it won't hurt to have another drink later today. It was something like that. I don't know if that's correct or not, but I read it and I thought it was pretty funny.
It'll lie to you.
Yeah, it lied to you, and that was it. New York City is doing something that I cannot believe they're doing. They're looking on sick days, add additional sick days for your pet. Oh. If your dog's sick, you don't have to come in. Why ever have anybody go to work? You know, I mean, a sick day for your dogs or your pet, and they say it's very popular, and they think it's going to pass in New York City.
They're thinking about making this law. This is not like the one company.
Yeah, no, it'd be something. It'd be like sick days where you got 2 weeks sick days. You'd have a certain number of sick dog days. You know, that as an employer, I would be, you know, I'd be astounded if somebody came in and
if they called in and said, I got to stay home because my dog's sick.
My dog's sick. Well, why don't you just stay with him permanently? You know, no need to come back. And that would stop a lot of it. In Norway, they're looking at banning people from the internet and social media that are 15 and below. And they, you know, I understand that it'd be hard to enforce, but I kind of, there's so much bullying goes on with high school and junior high students. Junior high girls are tough. I mean, they're mean, and they'll get to picking on somebody and be unmerciful. One thing, you know, I think Congress or the president should do an executive order is say you can put anything on the internet that you want to, but you got to put your name and your address and your phone number. That'd stop some of the crazy people. They wouldn't want that happening.
You mentioned earlier, as an employer, when we were talking about the sick days for the dog, as an employer, do you check out people's social media before you hire them on?
Before we hire them, we look at it. Look at Facebook and what they've done on Twitter or X, as it's now called, and you can get a pretty good feel of someone, of what they believe, and give you a good indication of what they think's important.
Right.
I want somebody that thinks it's important to, you know, have your job and go to the job and work hard and do, you know, be a team player. And that's something we try to preach at our law firm, Hance & Scarborough. We've got 2 people that started with us in 94, and they've been with us 30 years. And one of them, Lillian Morales, is an office manager, and Mel Morales, no relation, is a billing person and in charge of that. And they've been with us 30 years. And you don't have to retrain somebody all the time.
Yeah.
And so we'll work hard to give somebody a little extra time, or if their kid's going to college, give them 2 or 3 days off to take the kid to college and things like that. I had a guy who was interviewing with me one time, and he said, how many sick days do we get? And I said, however many you're sick. Don't come to work and give it to us. And he said, well, you know, most companies have like you get 2 weeks or something like that. I said, no, if you abuse it, we'll fire you. But just if you're sick, don't come to work. And you can do that in a small company, but it's tough to do if you're IBM or General Motors or something like that.
Yeah. I'm curious, and for our listeners that may be brand new and may not know, can you tell everyone what kind of work Hance Scarborough does?
We do legal work. We've got 10 people in Washington, and we've got 20 here in Austin, and we do a lot of lobbying. That's all we do at the federal level. We've got 3 members, former members of Congress that work for us, and a couple of former state senators. And we handle complex government problems. People are having a problem with an agency. I always say it's got abbreviations. They've got power. And that a lot of people call on their congressman to help them from time to time on issues. we used to get issues like somebody didn't get their Social Security check or something like that, we'd check out. We don't do that. Their local congressmen do that, but we do complex problems where the government's bringing some action against someone for allegedly not complying with some federal law, and that I think a lot of people think there's nothing you can do about it, but you can. You have to be able to stand up, and you're fighting a government that has unlimited staying power, and that's what you always have to look at, and that can you stay in at that point in time.
Yeah, you're fighting someone that prints their own money.
Print their own money, and they're good at it.
Mm-hmm.
The stupid criminal of the week, there was a guy in Ontario that got a DUI, driving under the influence, or DWI, driving while intoxicated, was running the Zamboni machine, that makes the ice for hockey games. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know that's a public road or whatever, but he kept running into the baseboard, and, some people got to calling the police, and the police that were there went over to talk to him, and he wouldn't talk, and then he ran at them, and so they finally got him stopped, and they arrested him and took him down, and he was drunk.
That's so Canadian.
Yeah, he just got drunk and decided he was making ice, and he'd have a few drinks with it, and definitely did that. On criminal matters, the real estate people did a survey on, would you live in a house where murder had taken place? And 32% of the people said yes. 38% said no. And then the rest said it depends on the price of the house. If you drop that price low enough, they'll move in there.
I wonder if that's something that has to be disclosed.
Yes.
It is?
Yes, it has to be disclosed. You got to tell them there was a murder here on such and such date. If you tell them, there was a break-in to murder here on such and such date, and we hadn't found the guy that did it, that's not going to help your sales chances at all.
Right.
And it's going to be pretty weak there. I believe I'll pass. Let's look at a house where there hasn't been a murder.
So where would you fall on this? Depends on the price?
Depends on the price. We had a neighbor that there was a murder in a neighbor's house in Lubbock, and that house sold after about a year. It finally sold. It was a real nice house, and but a lot of people, there's the deal of haunted house, and who will live in a haunted house, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that.
Right.
Artificial intelligence. It's doing things we hadn't even thought about that are unusual. There's a new artificial intelligence equipment that can determine from the oink of a pig if it's happy or not. And, I don't know if that's true or not. But that sounds like one of those studies that if you're chancellor or president, you hope is not coming out of your university. Because you have to... there was a university in the state of Texas that one time they had a survey on why people had sex, and they came back after this study that lasted almost 2 years that they were attracted to each other. Well, who would have ever guessed that? Dummies. I mean, I could have told them that, and they wouldn't have had to spend all that money, asking people questions. But you want your studies. We had to study a guy, and they're still doing it at Texas Tech, on pulse power that would stop roadside bombs. Oh. You can justify that. Mm-hmm. But if you're running a study on why people had sex or not, that one's going to be a little hard to justify. You can't go back and say, this is an in-depth study we did. And when I was in Congress, there was a study that was done about the sex life of the testy fly. And everybody just called hell over it. But they were trying to change it where they wouldn't reproduce because they were eating up the forest and running up the price of lumber. So, I mean, you got to be able to explain it. Mm-hmm. That's like the earmarks in Congress. You got to be able to explain what it's doing. And if you can explain it, then people are going to be okay. But if you're doing research and you do earmarks on how to stop roadside bombs, American public's not going to get upset about that.
No.
But if you're doing a earmark for someone to do a study on why people have sex, they're probably going to say, I don't think my money ought to go be spending that way.
How did it get funded? It just overlooked, or
well, the National Science Foundation, sometimes they'll approve some that are a little questionable, and there needs to be some guy that was a county commissioner in Dimmitt, Texas, that they run those things by. How's the public going to react when they hear this? Well, they're going to be okay, or they're going to raise hell about it.
Right.
They need to have someone that's in tune with the American public. L.A. Dodgers, New York Yankees. I take the game Friday night was incredible, and walk-off grand slam home run. I mean, it had never happened before. And the Yankees and the Dodgers have met in the World Series more than any two teams. It's happened 11 times. It has not happened since 1981 until this year. And of the 11 times, the Yankees have won 8 and the Dodgers have won 3. And I'm kind of pulling for the Dodgers. One of their owners is Bobby Patton, a friend of mine in Fort Worth. And, he's a big Dodgers fan and tries to make most of their games. And so, my family had been out there, and the Dodgers Park, or stadium, is an old stadium, but it's beautiful.
It is.
It is really nice, and people feel very comfortable there. Baseball is, you look at what they pay people, and they pay a lot of money, but they're having a game all the time for about 5 months, 6 months of the year, whereas football, you're having one game, every Sunday in the NFL, so it's you're limited on the amount of money that you bring in. Whereas baseball, you're starting in April, and then you're going to be playing till October, and so there's a lot of activity and a lot of money coming in, a lot of television ads and merchandise, and I got to looking the other night the number of people that are Japanese that are playing, and they didn't know what a baseball was until the U.S. troops were in there and started playing baseball. They taught them, they got a little better, and some of the greatest players in baseball are from Japan.
Yeah, the guy for the Dodgers, Shohei Ohtani, 50 home runs and 50 stolen bases, and that's the first time that's ever been done.
That's highly unusual, because with the stolen bases, it shows he's got a lot of speed, but with 50 home runs, shows he's got a lot of power. And usually you don't have that. We had a guy that ran track at Texas Tech, played football, Jimmy Walker from Seminole, Texas, and he won state in the shot put and the 100-yard dash.
Wow.
And that's
an athlete.
Yeah. Nobody had ever heard of that.
Tell me his name again.
Jimmy Walker.
That's amazing.
And from Seminole, Texas. His sons played at Tech.
Wow.
But they didn't win the shot put in the 100-yard dash all at the same time.
Wow.
The Sports Illustrated had an article within the last 20, 30 years about six-man football. And one of the articles, and I'm trying to think of the town, but they had a band, but there was only one guy in the band. But he played a guitar, he played drums, he played a cornet, he played a French horn, and so he'd get out and march. And one time he had a mule pull a little wagon with him playing in it, and so they had a low budget operation. But six-man football, if you want to see some offense, you'll see some games that'll be 80-something to 70-something, and it's big time. Most of the places they've played a lot of six-man footballs out in West Texas because they have little towns, and it's a long ways to the next little town.
You got one kid with speed, you got a good team.
Yeah, you got one kid with speed, you're the king. They center it to somebody and they pitch it back to somebody. That way they have a little more time to run a play. Election coming up, looking at a week from tomorrow, and I think that this election's been close, kind of like Reagan and Carter were, and if it breaks right, and it could be not a landslide like Reagan, but it could be an overwhelming victory. And the Senate races are more in play than they've ever been because the Democrats, they pull something out about the Republican candidate in Montana. So they think they now have a chance in Montana. They think they have a chance in Ohio, and the Republicans don't necessarily agree with that. But they're going to win West Virginia, which they did not have, and that'll be one. And if they pick up Ohio and Montana, they'll be cooking. They'll have a majority in the Senate. The Senate races are more important than the House races because you've got so many considerations that are going to be for the appointments, and that somebody gets appointed and whether the Senate will approve them or not.
If the Republicans win the Senate, who will be the leader?
Don't know. John Cornyn has a very good chance, and the other person, John Thune, out of South Dakota, and that it's a secret ballot. And one of the great comments in politics was Lamar Alexander, and he said he had a commitment. I believe it was 37, and that he only got 24 votes, and he needed to write thank you letters, but he didn't know who the three were that had told him they were committed to him and then didn't vote for him. So, and I've had senators tell me they think it'd be good that if anybody told you they were going to vote for you, that they had to take a lie detector test too after the election. But you start voting secret like that, it makes it tough. And there are a lot of senators just won't say, and they won't say beforehand. Now afterwards, I think every member of the Senate say, "I voted for you."
Oh yeah, because they're never going to know.
But that'll be a big race, and that'll take place in December. If the Republicans have the majority, it's even a bigger race. If they don't, it'd be for the minority leader. And you've had a change in leadership there, and so. It'll be a big difference.
Again, find us online at hanspodcast.com, and we encourage you to go back through the catalog of episodes, in particular, the episode with Senator Ted Cruz, which is really, really good. Chancellor, remind everybody of our saying of the day.
Saying of the day from Buzz Aldrin said, "Failure is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign you're alive and well and working hard to accomplish things." Thanks for listening. Talk to you later.